All right, let's dive into market failures. We've got some really fascinating economic excerpts from you listeners, and we're going to break down what they mean and, most importantly, why you should care.
Most of us don't think much about all those economic forces at play when we're out buying things or using services.
It's true, we just kind of assume things work. But sometimes the market doesn't quite hit the mark, right? That's where market failures come in.
Exactly. It's not that markets are bad. It's just, well, sometimes that invisible hand could use a little guidance.
Ah!
Like, think about it. You benefit from public goods every day, and you don't even realize it. Roads, clean water,
Yeah.
things that markets alone just wouldn't provide efficiently.
Okay, I see what you mean. But our sources talk about two types of market failure, complete and partial. What's the difference?
So a complete market failure is basically when there's no market at all. The perfect example is lighthouses. No company would build one just to charge ships for safe passage. It's essential, but there's no profit. That's where the government steps in to provide what the market won't.
Yeah, we'd have a lot more shipwrecks without lighthouses. So then, partial market failures are when the market exists, but it's not working as well as it could.
Exactly. Think about a healthcare. If it was left entirely to market forces, some people just couldn't afford care, and that would cause all sorts of issues.
It really makes you think about that balance between letting the market do its thing and stepping in when things go wrong. Our sources go into a bunch of different factors that can lead to these market hiccups. Let's start with public goods versus private goods.
Sounds good. Think about a streaming service. You pay for it every month, you get all the shows, no one else can watch unless you share your password. That's a private good. Excludable, rivalrous.
Okay, got it. So how's that different from a public good?
Well, a public good you can't prevent anyone from benefiting, and one person using it doesn't stop someone else from using it too. Like streetlights. Everyone benefits, and my using the light doesn't stop you from using it.
But wouldn't that cause problems? If you can't exclude anyone from using it, why would anyone pay?
That's the big issue. Yeah, the free rider problem. Since people can benefit without paying, companies have no incentive to provide them. Imagine a public park. Everyone enjoys it, but would anyone actually pay to maintain it? Not likely.
I guess public goods are like a giant gift everyone shares, but someone still has to pay for the wrapping paper.
That's a great analogy. And that someone is usually the government. They use tax revenue to fund these essential public goods.
That actually makes a lot of sense. I never really stopped to think about how public goods are paid for.
That's one of those things you take for granted, right? Now, let's switch gears a bit. Another thing that causes market failures is asymmetric information.
Ooh, that one sounds interesting. Our sources talk about the situations where, like, one person knows more than the other, like used car salesmen, maybe even doctors.
You got it.
Mm.
Those are good examples. These information imbalances can really mess things up in markets.
Mm.
Say you're buying a used car. The seller knows if it's good or bad, but you don't. You could end up overpaying or just not buying at all because you're not sure.
It's not just the price either, right? It's about trust and not getting ripped off. Makes you think twice about those deals that seem too good to be true.
Exactly. And it goes beyond cars, too. Think about insurance. Companies figure out risk based on info they have that you don't. So you might end up paying more even if you're not actually a bigger risk.
Shows you how important it is to do your research, huh? Knowledge is power, especially with markets. Let's move on to another cool concept, though. Externalities. Unintended consequences, right?
That's it. They're like ripple effects, the effects of economic activity that go beyond just the buyer and seller. And just like ripples, they can be good or bad.
I need a visual. Give me a positive externality, something that makes things a bit better without even trying.
Okay, imagine a beekeeper. They keep bees to make honey and, well, make money. But those bees pollinate nearby farms, and that helps everyone's crops grow better. That's a positive externality, a win-win.
That's a great example. It makes you realize how connected everything is. Now, for the other side, give me a negative externality, something that makes us all frown.
Picture a factory dumping pollution into a river. They might be making stuff cheaply, but the pollution hurts the fish, the water, the whole ecosystem, and those costs. They aren't reflected in the price of what they're selling.
That's a tough reminder that sometimes what's good for one person isn't good for everyone. Makes you think about the real cost of what we buy and use, huh?
It does. Markets often miss these external costs and benefits, so we get too much stuff with negative externalities and not enough of the good stuff.
So we've got public goods, asymmetric info, and externalities,
Hmm.
all causing market failures. It's like there's a whole secret world behind our everyday buying and selling.
And there's more. Our sources bring up another big one, monopoly power.
Everyone knows monopolies from board games, but they're not so fun in real life. How do they actually impact us and the market?
Well, think about it. One company controls the whole market for something. They're the only game in town. They can limit how much they make to drive up prices. They can stop innovating because there's no competition. Consumers end up with fewer choices and things cost more.
So monopolies can really mess up that whole supply and demand thing. What do our sources say about how this problem is dealt with?
Governments have a big role here. They want to prevent monopolies and make sure things are fair. They use things like competition laws to break up monopolies or stop new ones from forming. They also set up special groups to oversee certain industries. It's all about fair competition and protecting consumers.
Like having a referee in the economic game. Right, making sure everyone's playing by the rules. Our sources mention a specific group here in Ireland, right?
Yeah, Comreg. They regulate communications. Their job is to make sure the telecom market is fair. They prevent monopolies, encourage competition, and make sure we don't get stuck with sky-high prices and limited choices.
It's good to know there are systems in place to prevent those go directly to jail, do not pass go situations. Speaking of intervention, our sources highlight some of the ways governments try to address market failures more broadly.
Perfect timing. Now that we've seen those culprits, public goods, asymmetric information, externalities, and monopolies, let's look at what tools governments use to fix things.
Sounds like we're getting into economic policy. Let's unpack those tools in the next part of our deep dive.
Welcome back. Ready for more? Now we're going to take these market failure ideas and see how they actually happen in the real world. It's about connecting those dots, from the theory to what we see every day.
Exactly. Defining the terms is one thing, but I want to see how they really affect us. What are some real-life situations where we see these market failures?
Let's start with the environment. Clean air, we need it to live, right? Classic public good, non-excludable, non-rivalrous. But think about it. Without those government rules, those global agreements, companies might just pollute the air we all breathe, all for a bigger profit.
So all those environmental regulations we hear about, like limits on what factories can release or car exhaust, they're trying to fix this market failure, right?
Exactly. If we left the market alone, clean air might not be valued enough. We'd all pay the price. Government steps in with rules and incentives to try and make those individual choices line up with what's good for everyone.
It's kind of crazy how something as basic as air can be messed up by market forces. What about asymmetric information? Any examples besides used cars and insurance?
Tons. Think about the 2008 financial crisis. One of the things that caused it was, well, those mortgage-backed securities. Really complex stuff. Investors bought and sold them without really understanding the risks. That information asymmetry, it led to, well, bad investments, and eventually the whole housing market crashed.
Whoa, that's a scary example. Even the most sophisticated markets can be vulnerable to this information problem.
Transparency is key. When information is accurate and easy to get, markets work better and people can make smart choices.
Speaking of smart choices, let's go back to healthcare. Our sources mention it as a possible partial market failure. What makes healthcare so tricky?
It's just, well, it's different from buying a car or a phone. Healthcare can be really unpredictable, super expensive. If we left it all to market forces, you might only be able to get care if you could afford it.
That's a tough one, isn't it? A real ethical dilemma. How do you balance a free market with making sure everyone gets healthcare, no matter how much money they have?
Right. Different countries do it differently. Some have universal health care. Others rely more on private insurance. No easy answers there.
Definitely gives you something to think about. Now, externalities in the real world, we talked about pollution. But I'm curious about those hidden costs and benefits, the ones we don't even realize are happening.
Okay, how about traffic? Every extra car on the road makes everyone's commute longer. That time lost. It's a real cost. It hurts productivity and our well-being. But people usually don't think about that collective cost when they decide to drive.
It's like all our individual actions can add up to something that's not good for anyone. How do you even fix that?
There are different ways. Like some governments charge drivers to go into busy areas at certain times, congestion pricing. Or they invest in public transit, so driving isn't the only option. Even bike lanes help. It's about encouraging choices that are good for everyone.
So it's not always about punishing the bad stuff. It's about rewarding the good stuff, too. What about positive externalities, though? We talked about beekeepers. Any other real-life examples?
Well, how about education? A more educated workforce is good for everyone, right? It fuels the economy, sparks innovation. Individuals get the skills and knowledge to earn more, and that helps everyone.
So when governments invest in education, they're actually addressing a positive externality.
Exactly.
Mm.
Subsidies, scholarships, making sure everyone has access.
Yeah.
It's all about creating those positive ripples. It's recognizing that education isn't just good for you, it's good for society.
It's amazing how all these economic ideas we've been talking about actually have such a real impact on our lives. Public goods, information problems, externalities. Now back to monopolies. Let's get into how they really affect things.
Okay, the tech world has some really interesting examples. Like, remember Microsoft in the 90s? They were so big, people were worried about competition being stifled, worried it would hurt consumers.
And now we have similar concerns about, Google, Facebook, all those. How are governments and regulators dealing with this?
That's a tough one, especially with tech changing so fast.
Yeah.
Antitrust laws, the ones meant to prevent monopolies, they've been around forever. But with the digital age, they're constantly being challenged and reinterpreted.
So it's not just about breaking up the big guys, it's about making sure new ones don't pop up in these new industries.
That's a big part of it, yeah. Governments are also starting to focus more on data privacy, making sure these tech giants don't misuse all the info they collect. It's a tricky balance. How do you encourage innovation while also protecting people?
It's really interesting to see how these market failures and the ways governments try to fix them have real consequences for everyone. Businesses, us as consumers, the whole economy. But I think it's important to remember economics isn't just about numbers and graphs.
Absolutely. It's about people. It's about how we live, our well-being, the kind of society we want.
Yeah. Market failures. If they aren't fixed, they can make things unequal, they can break down trust, and really hurt society. It's about making sure everyone benefits from economic activity, that we all have a chance to succeed.
And that's where governments come in.
Yeah.
It's not always perfect. There can be drawbacks, but they can make a huge difference in fixing these failures and creating a more just world.
It's complicated, and we've only just begun to understand it, but I think we have a good foundation now. Let's move to a really interesting question from our sources. Is government always the answer? Are there unintended consequences even when they're trying to help?
That's a great question, and we'll get into it after a quick break to think about what we've covered so far.
So government intervention, it's not always the perfect solution, is it? Are there times when it might actually do more harm than good?
Yeah, that's something we really need to consider. Governments step in with the best intentions. Often it's necessary, but there can be downsides. It's a tricky balance. Sometimes the cure can be worse than the disease.
I'm curious about that. What are some of the arguments against government intervention, even when they're trying to fix those market failures we talked about?
One of the big worries is that too much regulation can actually stifle innovation, hurt economic growth. Think about it. If businesses are swamped with rules and regulations, all that paperwork and compliance costs. It discourages them from investing, from taking risks. It's like trying to run a race with weights tied to your ankles.
So it's a trade-off, right? You're trying to protect consumers and the environment, but you also want a market that's dynamic and competitive.
Exactly. Finding that balance is tough. Too much regulation, and businesses can't breathe. Too little, and consumers and the environment are vulnerable.
Are there any other downsides to watch out for?
Well, another concern is that sometimes government intervention can be driven by politics, not sound economics. Those special interest groups. They lobby hard, they can influence decisions. You can end up with policies that benefit a few, but not the majority.
It's like even good intentions can go astray in the political system.
Exactly. Transparency and accountability in government, that's crucial. We need to make sure policies are based on evidence, on what's truly good for everyone.
So if government intervention isn't always the answer, what else can we do? Our sources mention a few interesting alternatives.
One approach that's gaining traction is behavioral economics. It uses insights from psychology to nudge people towards making choices that are good for them and for society.
That sounds really cool. How does that work in the real world?
Okay, think about saving for retirement. Lots of people don't save enough. Instead of forcing people to contribute more, which no one likes, some governments have set up these opt-out plans. Basically, you're automatically enrolled unless you specifically say no.
So you're changing the default, making it easier to do the right thing?
Right. People tend to just stick with the easiest option. Behavioral economics is a powerful tool. It helps fix problems without all those heavy-handed rules.
Any other alternatives worth looking at?
Definitely. Transparency and information sharing are really important. Give people the info they need to make good choices, like nutrition labels on food. That helps people choose healthier options, even if the market might push them towards stuff that's less healthy but makes more money.
It's all about leveling the playing field, right? Giving consumers the power to make choices that match their values.
That's it. And promoting competition is key too. When you have lots of companies competing, they have to innovate, they have to offer good quality and fair prices to get customers. Competition keeps everyone on their toes. It's good for consumers.
It sounds like there's no magic bullet for fixing market failures. You need a lot of different approaches, and you have to consider the context, the possible downsides of intervention, and all the alternatives.
Couldn't have put it better myself. It's about finding that balance, right? Letting markets do their thing, but stepping in when they don't work for everyone. The goal is a society that's both prosperous and fair.
We've covered a lot of ground today, haven't we? We started with the theory of market failures, then looked at how they play out in real life, and all the complexities of government trying to fix things.
And this is just the beginning. Economics is always changing. New problems, new solutions. It never stops.
That's a good reminder that learning is a journey, not a destination. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. I hope you learned something new about those invisible forces that shape our everyday lives. Keep thinking critically, and remember to question everything.
Absolutely. Stay curious, everyone.